Welcome back to the program. We are joined today by Robert Barnes, the very renowned trial lawyer who's an expert on the US Constitution and also very well known as an excellent political commentator. So thank you for coming on the program.
Oh yeah, glad to be here.
So I want to discuss with you a bit the direction of America first, the US economy. Uh, but I thought a good place to start would be how do you see the concept of populism, because it used to be an acceptable term to use. At one point, from Barack Obama to Bernie Sanders, they defined themselves as populists. These days, it's become almost a slur, someone undesirable. How do you define populism and its growing role in the United States?
There's a good book on this, sort of on the extended global history of populism of certain shared traits, called "Fixing the System" by Adrian Kosminski that I recommend. But I came up and I was born populist. Came up in Southeast Tennessee. Comes from Appalachian roots. Family goes all the way back to the founding in Rhode Island. And the populism is sort of in the bloodstream of American politics. And it just has varying degrees of recognition in the academy. And when the academy likes populism, then it celebrates it. But more often than not, it demonizes it. So if it can be associated with Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, then all good for it. When it's instead the associated with more of the right, whether it's a George Wallace, a Donald Trump, a Ronald Reagan, something else, then all of a sudden something can be dismissed. The great American political scientist that really I recommend for anybody who wants to understand American politics is Kevin Phillips. His best book is The Emerging Republican Majority, which was the campaign text for the Nixon campaign. But while it looks like a book about the 68 campaign, it's really about the entire history of American politics and the potency and power of populism. Populism is the driving influence in American politics, and it's trust of the individual. I would say it's skeptical of big concentrated power, whether that concentrated power is in Hollywood, Wall Street, corporate America, Washington, doesn't matter where it is, there's a skepticism of that institutional hoarding of power, and they want more power for themselves. Whether it's the old homesteader tradition in America, trying to get your own farm and feed yourself and have the property to be self-sufficient, self-supporting, whether it's large aspects of labor unions like the AFL in its founding. There's a dispersed expression of populism, but it has been the driving impetus and impulse in American politics, really from the inception of the founding.
Yeah, it's easy to see why the US would be more inclined to lean towards the populism, given, I mean, the whole revolutionary moment, the focus on the individual rights, overall, the people being very critical of be it the political elites, economic elites, or the cultural elites, for that sake, accruing too much power. So this whole idea of the people pushing back against the elites, it's well, definitely more in the American spirit, I guess, than here in Europe. But one of the things they tend to push against, though, is the deep state, which is again several words for this one. They call it the blob, the permanent bureaucracy. How do you assess this? Also in the framework of what the populist movement that drove, or I guess, yeah, led Trump to power as well.
No doubt. The deep state, I consider, whether, Peter Dale Scott's late 1960s trying to describe who took the idea of the dual state, which was, started by an economist publisher back in the late 19th century. How can you have these administrative government operate independent and immune from public and political pressure? The whether it's like the prime minister, yes, prime minister shows on the UK kind of portrayed this in the early 80s, and it's this institutionalization of and the bureaucratization of power that is immune from political and public pressure. Little d democracy. In other words, the deep state looks like the EU's definition of democracy and not the American populist definition of democracy. Some of us would call it anti-democratic. But the American deep state has had different sort of, you could argue the British royal regime that the Americans revolted against to create the revolution was a kind of deep state in its colonial administrative corruption. We saw a version of it during the Civil War that started to emerge. Some would suggest was behind the assassination attempts or complicit in it. That kind of fell apart in the 1870s, wasn't sustained. A third effort was during World War I, but there was such a political rebellion against World War I in the United States, back when we had real populist Republicans like Senator Gerald Nye from North Dakota, who wrote the Great War Racketeering Committee, working with General Butler about war as a racket, all of that. And then you get World War II, and World War II was the great success of the deep state. They used the post-Cold War era, or the Cold War era and the post-World War II era to establish and institutionalize power. And literally, it's just kind of a dual state. It's these administrative, bureaucratic parts of government that continue to push a particular agenda, regardless of what the elected officials want or think. Slowly but surely and steadily, they capture those institutions and keep what, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence was supposed to govern and regulate and supervise the intelligence community created by Senator Frank Church, who was illegally spied on by the NSA, part of his inspiration, going back to when we had populist type folks like Church from Idaho. That is now converted to where today, whoever sits on the Senate Intelligence Community is representing the intelligence community in Congress, defending them, protecting them, immunizing them. Even when they go a little bit AWOL, like Feinstein does, they spy on them and get away with it, related to Guantanamo. So we have this institutional deep state that has entrenched, the sort of like an octopus. It has tentacles everywhere in parts of the media and parts of the think tank world, and it's badly influenced academia. People forget that aspect of Eisenhower's farewell address in 1961. It was part of this military-industrial complex was him warning about a deep state that was also going to corrupt science. And then we saw that with the response to COVID on full display. So the deep state is very powerful in the United States. It's only in the post-Cold War era, it's only faced meaningful opposition once or twice, with the Church Committee in the mid '70s, late '70s, and Jimmy Carter's presidency, and sporadically with Trump. They fear Trump just because he isn't captured by them, even though Trump himself has shown inconsistency in opposing them. Just being any kind of opponent, any kind of willingness to second guess them makes you an existential threat. And the deep state power is real, it's palpable. That's why they're targeting Congressman Thomas Massie in the upcoming elections, for example. So and it's one of the most pernicious influence, I would suggest, not only on the United States, but on the entire world for the last half century.
Do you see then the development of America first? Do you see this? I guess how can we conceptualize? Because at the moment it seems to mean several different things, often contradictory at the same time. But it seems to have again risen on the populist movement that is to counter some of this the elite which has entrenched itself beyond the democratic control. But it also seems to be linked to the recognition that if the US has overextended itself, that the empire, preserving the empire, could begin to undermine the republic. Is that a fair definition, or how would you assess this whole America First movement?
The America was founded in opposition to the idea of empire. My old cousin John Quincy Adams said, "We do not go abroad searching for monsters to destroy. Since the end of the Cold War, that's all we do is try to find monsters to destroy." Extract. And what's unique kind of about the American empire is you look at past empires, it actually enriched the working population of that nation, or was supposed to. That was part of the buy-in. Not in the U.S. The empire has come at the expense of America's working class, their prosperity, literally their lives, and their liberties frequently, particularly in the post 9/11 era, but it's part of the Cold War era as well. And that constellation is directly America First was organized to oppose it and to restore our original constitutional principles. You can go back and look at the only congressman to vote against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Not coincidentally, he's from the exact same part of the country that I'm from and that Congressman Thomas Massie is from, Eastern Kentucky. He was an old school Republican who served in World War II, and he said this was a bunch of crap. Go back and listen to the prescient declarations by people like Senator Taft, who said NATO will be a disaster. NATO will be a trap. Do not get us involved in NATO. Now look at the Ukraine conflict as a perfect example of what a disaster NATO has been for the interest of ordinary, everyday American people, but also the American constitutional republic that some of us believe in still, despite what is taking place. So there's the America First, like Trump likes to pretend he created it. Trump's a great marketer. That's his great skill. To be honest with you, that's kind of the limit of his skill set at times. But the all he did was read. He could just listen to talk radio, and he could listen to what people were saying, and he just regurgitated it. Now he has some instincts that share that, going back to the 1980s on trade and skepticism about foreign entanglements. But he is not the foundation or creation of MAGA. He is the continuation and an extenuation of MAGA. And all the efforts to suppress these populist rebellions, whether in the UK, whether in France, whether in Germany, whether in Europe, you can steal a few elections here and there. They stole them in Romania, stole them in Moldova. Many Americans think they stole them in 2020 here in the United States of America. But you can only suppress it for so long, because what's driving it, what's motivating it in the United States is a long history of opposition to entanglement in these foreign conflicts and serving the interest of sort of a foreign globalist master rather than the interest of the local American population, whether that involves labor or that involves our lives and liberty. But it also just reflects the reality on the ground. Working class people in America have been struggling now for half a century, and they're done and tired with it. And the new generation is really done and tired with it. So regardless of whether Trump succeeds or failed, MAGA is going nowhere, and populism is only going to continue to surge, not recede.
So you think that MAGA is more or less that it's decoupled a bit from America First? Because it looked like one of the most powerful messages of Trump was his criticism of NATO. Because again, if there was any organization that provided the U.S. with foreign entanglement and well, I guess undermining its national interests as well, it could be NATO. I mean, this has become, well, during the Cold War, I would have said, well, there was a need for a defensive alliance against the Soviets, but these days it looks like a military alliance which has the main purpose of, well, exist to deal with the security threats caused by its own existence, it seems. But I guess my short question, do you see MAGA now having split with America First? And well, what would this mean, though?
I think MAGA and America First are still very much at the hip. The question is the degree to which Trump represents that, reflects that, and expresses that, and manifests that in actual policy. So within the administration, this is a better administration than his first term, but far from perfect. So what Trump has is, in Scott Bessent, he has a guy that's a protege of George Soros that represents Wall Street. He picked him to represent Wall Street. Like, people kind of imagine, hey, he's the elected president. Shouldn't he be dictating policy? In reality, that probably hasn't really been true in the United States for about a century. You can hear Barack Obama making statements like that. You can hear George W. Bush towards Glenn Beck recently talked about it. He's like, doesn't matter who comes in. Somebody else is going to run the show. This was Bush himself, a rather arrogant individual, usually by nature. And to a degree, this whole empire suffers from the great sin of the Greek tradition, or that the great Greek myths talk about, which is hubris. That's what I see with NATO. That's what I see with the American deep state. You look at the clinical definition: exaggerated pride, contempt for others, a diminished sense of reality. Isn't that exactly what we're seeing on full display, whether it relates to Ukraine, China, other parts of the Middle East, other parts of the world? We're seeing a complete disconnect from reality. We're seeing a complete contempt for the other side. And we're seeing a ridiculous, exaggerated pride. That isn't really MAGA. There's an aspect of MAGA that's very patriotic, but people should not confuse that with America F yeah. That's a little bit of a small slinter of boomer cons that are quite literally dying off politically. The working class person, especially younger working class people, they want nothing to do with these stupid foreign wars. They want no more foreign entanglements. NATO is the perfect illustration and example of it. Ukraine is, the fact we're still giving money to Zelensky is just an embarrassment in the United States. That's why Trump has to go to great lengths to pretend he's not. He's giving it to NATO. And it's like, well, who funds NATO? Last I checked, it was still us. So the whole, it's like our AI system of economic development. It's everybody paying each other money in a circle. And we have 95% of our GDP, according to a Harvard study, tied up over the last year with just AI growth. Then you dig into AI growth and it's like this. It's like one big circular transaction. So the MAGA's going nowhere. America First is going nowhere. Trump likes to pretend he invented it. It was actually a New York Times smear. The New York Times in 2016 said, oh my goodness, this is like, the 1940s, World War II, anti-war, America First movement. And Trump looked like, America First, oh, that's great, I'm going to use that. And that's where he got the idea. He just stole it from the New York Times as an insult. But he didn't create it or invent it or originate it. Now, within the White House, you have the people who best represent, Trump goes back and forth. Some days he's America first. Some days he wants to satisfy the powerful institutional interests of the country. And so that's why Scott Bessent represents Wall Street. Rubio represents the sort of neoliberal, neoconservative establishment think tanks at the State Department and by extension, the military industrial complex and the surveillance state. So those guys are representing those interests, not America's voters. Then you have people representing America's voters who got capital because their capital is popular support. Vice President Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, and Robert Kennedy, Secretary of Health and Human Services. And to an extension, Witkoff represents the MAGA side of Trump. Rubio represents the deep state donor institutional control over Trump. And at times, people are starting to wonder whether Trump even runs his own foreign policy. The way he flips on any given day almost seems like he's letting others dictate to him the outcome. So the core of MAGA is still there. Core of America First is still there. Argentina first, Ukraine first, Israel first, every other country first, spending all his time overseas. This is not America first. And he's undermining and sabotaging his presidency. And he only partially appreciates it because the people who run Washington are utterly disconnected from the rest of the country. And there's no better sign of the decay of American empire and American power and the American prosperity than the fact that some of the wealthiest communities in the entire world are the suburbs of the District of Corruption. The DC suburbs. It's like, how in the world are these places the wealthiest places? The sign of a growing, thriving, productive society is that you make things and at the wealthiest part of your country things. We are just the opposite. It's the parasitic political class in DC that cashes in. The question is, how well can Trump be a transformative figure, returning us to our constitutional roots? Or how much is he just a transitional figure, transitioning us away from the end of empire and a return to the populist roots? But I believe either way, that's where the American public wants. That's what the American people will continue to demand. And Trump's weaknesses or limitations will only unveil the need for institutional reforms as the ultimate remedy.
Well, on this whole platform that Trump ran on, that is to shift from empire to America first. Well, as you suggested, he's flipped a few times, and there's always this the discussions I hear that some people suggest that he's simply appeasing the hawks, the globalists, if you will, within his own camp, or because Washington, of course, is not completely with him on this, and the deep state is still very much there. Others are saying that it's been completely captured. Do you lean then towards a more third option, that he was never fully in control to begin with, or how do you make sense of well, one good, just to build on it, just a good case study would be this recent back and forth with the Russians, because as you remember, he was very strict. He was going to do a countdown. The Russians has to accept unconditional ceasefire, otherwise, they'll be held to pay. And the days ran out, and they decided to meet in Alaska. He came back saying, well, yeah, unconditional ceasefire is not peace at all. We have to address the underlying causes. And then he was going to get back to the Russians, and now he's suddenly talking about the ceasefire again. I mean, they're quite confused now in Moscow. Like, what happened? We had a talk. We were moving forward, and then he's going back. Is this him not in control, or is just him being dishonest to the Russians? Is he piecing the hawks? It's very confusing to understand what's going on there now.
Trump is only partially in control. So people imagine that if you're elected president of the United States, you're in full control. But President Kennedy thought that, and they murdered him. Robert Kennedy tried to get back into power, and they murdered him. Richard Nixon tried to install his own power base, maybe for good, maybe for bad reasons, but they impeached and got him removed from the presidency. Jimmy Carter tried to make little challenges here and there, and they hijacked his presidency with the Iran-Contra hostage deal that really started during the latter stage of his own presidency. The Reagan was never really going to take on the deep state establishment. He was embedded with them to a large degree. Poppy Bush, George W. Bush, same deal. Bill Clinton, Obama, same deal. Biden, same deal. So none of those people have really ever meaningfully challenged or contested that power base. But it was the way Putin used to describe American presidents. He goes, I think they all really want to come in and change things, but then the men in gray suits arrive and they run the show. So Putin has always had a much better read on American presidential politics than almost any other foreign leader, in my opinion. I think it's why he's been gentle and generous and very diplomatic during all of Trump's temper tantrums over the past 6 months. He understands what the pressures are, and he understands how limited Trump really is, at least in his own self-perception. I mean, take someone like Eisenhower. Here's a guy who, why did he wait until his farewell address to talk about what was becoming a systematically serious threat to the future of constitutional liberty? He thought it serious enough to spend his whole farewell address talking about it, but he didn't have the guts to challenge it during its rise to power in the 1950s. And then look at Trump every time he's gone just a little bit off that line. When he said, hey, let's get along, wouldn't America be better off if we got along with Russia, if we got along with Putin? He said that in 2015, that launched the Russiagate investigation from that stage forward. Then he gets Mueller, where they try to indict and investigate every member of his friends or family. Then after that, he goes on Ukraine. He goes like, maybe we should wait before we send more arms to Ukraine to make sure it's all not corrupt. He gets impeached within 2 weeks later. Then he tries to challenge certain aspects of the 2020 election. What do? They impeach him again. And then after that, they indict him not once, not twice, not three times, but four different times. They try to bankrupt him not once, not twice, but three different times on completely bogus suits. And they tried to murder him not once, but twice. And the second guy had connections to Ukraine all over the place, which they've tried to suppress the heck out of. So if you're Trump, the message that you've been gotten is the moment you deviate just a little bit, trouble for you is coming in the most personal form. And so the degree to which he's able to make that move, he feels limited by. And to the degree that Rubio pushes strongly back, or Bessent pushes strongly back, or Ratcliffe at the CIA, who is just recycling on Ukraine, he just feeds them whatever Ukraine and the Brits say. That's why our intelligence is terrible on Ukraine internally. The State Department Ukraine desk is basically the same people as when Victoria Nuland was there. That's why you even have someone like Vice President Vance, who wants us out of this conflict, and is much more America First oriented in his inclinations, being spoon-fed false information and false intel from our own State Department, our own CIA, and our own Pentagon. The people of the Pentagon are constantly feeding false and fake intel. That's why you got that lunatic talking about we can just invade Kaliningrad, no problem. That's the kind of, we're back to the 1950s when you got like Curtis bombs away LeMay, who couldn't wait to nuke the next country. Who all those generals after they won World War II was like, we got nukes, nobody else does. Let's go nuke Soviet Union. Let's go nuke China. We can run the world. You read their internal stuff. Dr. Strangelove wasn't really a fiction film; it was a documentary. And you got some of those lunatics now back in power at the top and the peak of the Pentagon. And Hegseth is not able to discipline them in any meaningful way. Someone like McGregor could have. And I think it was a mistake of the Trump administration not to bring him back in. But the Israeli lobby has used their disparate power in the Republican Party, particularly Miriam Adelson and others, to block people like McGregor, to remove other reformers from the State Department and the Defense Department. So my view is Trump is a president elected to end all of this, but he does not feel he has the ease of power to do so. That's why he will constantly try to get buy-in from everybody, or the least amount of resistance. And it was try to get a deal done with Putin that they would accept. The problem is they can't accept because Russia's existential for the globalist crowd. Losing Ukraine is a humiliating disaster for the globalist view of the world, and they can't accept it. 10 years from now, they'll still be pretending they're winning. I mean, it'll be worse than it's the Holy Grail one, whatever. The knights, he's lost like four, all limbs, both arms are gone, both legs are gone. He's like, oh, it's just a little scratch, just a little scratch. That's every time I hear Ukraine, lie propaganda. That's what I hear. Slopaganda is what it really is. So that's my view. My view is that Trump still, I believe, has strong instincts. Like people make fun of all the stuff about, oh, he wants a Nobel Peace Prize, et cetera. I still prefer my presidents to seek peace and want to be known for peace rather than war. So I think that instinct is there. I think that instinct is real. I think he will still try to find ways to express it. But he feels very restrained by the military-industrial complex, the deep state, and the donor control in American politics. And that's why you're seeing the flip-flop back and forth, back and forth.
It's interesting you called Dr. Strangelove a documentary because it was actually based on the Rand Corporation, so which is the think tank of the intelligence community. Just to summarize the mad thinking that went on in there. So yeah, I think you're onto something. But with it looks like the policies now towards Russia is going down a very dark path though, because as you suggested, the Russians they kind of recognize that yeah, Trump is limited, but and in many areas he can be very weak in terms of pressure. But on the other hand, there will never be another Trump. I mean, out of Washington, there's not going to come anyone who wants to get along with Russia, who wants to see if they can undo the past 100 years of poor relations. But because of this, they seem to be willing to or wanting to avoid any escalation to the point where they let their deterrent slip further and further. And now, of course, that Trump has come out with guns blazing, sorry, with the sanctions on the Russian oil companies, but also now talking about long-range strikes in Russia, which will be managed probably not probably will be managed by Westerners, Western operators firing Western weapons with Western targeting. So uh, again, this is a direct war, and so within Russia now, Putin's efforts to get closer to Trump is now coming with a great cost because there's building up a lot of pressure now to restore the deterrent, and I would expect over the following days and weeks, you will see a much more fierce language coming from Moscow that this is it. Now they're going to draw a clear red line. And again, if NATO wants to bring the war to Russia, then Russia will have to respond. It's a dangerous time ahead, but the deep state as it is in the United States, how far are they willing to take this? Because again, this we seem to, at least from my viewpoint, we seem to be moving very close to a war now.
I think no, it was up to the deep state. They really think they can win limited nuclear war, and you've seen scholars, academics, think tanks, people float these ideas over the last 5 years. So that's how nuts those people are. My own view is Trump was never going to send tomahawks. I still think Trump never will. I know there's a lot of skepticism out there because of his rhetoric and language. I think Trump, if you look at what Trump is mostly trying to stave off, is the Senate forcing him to impose 500% sanctions on the whole world related to Russian oil that would sink the U.S. economy and drive prices through the roof. It's not because he cares one way or the other about Russia, because he understands its domestic effect. His number one benefit of getting prices under control, they're still too high, but getting them under control in the United States has been energy costs. He loses that the moment there's real sanctions against Russia. The other thing is Trump has a habit of saying something really big. I recommend people, follow the State Department, White House, and Treasury Department little executive order releases or certifications. Watch them carve out massive loopholes. Like take India. Like one of the key people involved in India refining is close to the Trump family. There's no way that guy's getting whacked. So as an example. So in Germany, that's figured out that they still have vestigial ownership interests that are connected to the same Russian companies that got sanctioned. So they're running and begging for exemptions. The watch Trump, like he even did this with India. Like he put 50% sanctions, and then you look at tariffs, and then you look underneath it. He exempted like 80% of the products. So he has a habit of doing something real big rhetorically and then utterly watering it down in terms of policy impact so he can't get blowback. I think he truly does not want the. I think what one message that has been relayed very clearly to him by Putin is that it would be a real red line if tomahawks were used or something comparable to tomahawks were used. Trump has got that message. Now that doesn't mean the Pentagon isn't running around linking to people. Hey, we're giving Ukraine means of doing long-term bombing with logistics and intelligence support, leaking that to the Wall Street Journal. They just got it a little ahead of their skis. Trump has no interest in that occurring. That's why he publicly denied it. And I think you'll see Trump pull that back. So Trump will try to avoid, like often he talks really big. And then he does like Syria. Oh, yeah, we're going to do something 20 his first term. Right? And then we bomb an empty airport after calling him up and telling him 9 hours in advance. Right. So Trump has a habit, like you look at Iran. So, yeah, he gets involved in the strikes. He supports the Israeli effort. But what does the U.S. actually do? Well, maybe we hit something there. Maybe we just hit the side of a mountain. Who knows? But, I would focus on what he's actually does more than his rhetoric and his language. I think Putin has played that very intelligently, even though politically it's led to a lot of blowback for Putin in Russia. But ignore Trump's rhetoric. Look at what he does. And that will, in my view, is what he'll do is try to minimize anything that's escalatory towards Russia while trying to balance out the balance of powers within the United States. He's mostly not having to negotiate with either Zelensky or Putin. He's mostly negotiating with the American deep state and military industrial complex. What will they let him get away with and what will they not let him get away with? And that's the political situation. And he's giving a crash course to Vice President Vance as to the scope and scale of the problem in the U.S., which Vance has personally experienced and been giving false intel. Trump got false intel on Israel, for example, that now Witkoff has gone public with, that the CIA and Mossad were complete, and the State Department, run to Rubio, were lying to Witkoff about what Hamas would and wouldn't take. They're doing the exact same thing as we speak about Russia. They're doing the exact same thing in various contexts about China. But you now see there's probably going to be a deal done in China because China has the rare earth monopoly, refinement monopoly that we are not going to be able to replace anytime real soon. So Trump will back off his main objective, which was to reshape the U.S.-China relationship and reindustrialize America. That's unfortunately probably going to take a step back because of this. But Vance is starting to see and recognize the scope and scale of misinformation and malinformation given by our own State Department, CIA, and Pentagon, because the deep state is still in control of the source of information, and that's how they maintain control over people like Trump. The other way is through donor control, think tank control, and press control. You only see one narrative in the United States. Like if you dig in and try to find how's the Russian economy done over the last 5 years, almost anywhere, AI, you name it, Google search, et cetera, they'll give you false information from like 300 sources. It will seem overwhelming. Yet you go to the World Bank of all places and they'll say, yeah, the Russian economy has actually been pretty fine. Amazingly, that information wasn't being given to the vice president or president of the United States. That's where we're at is they monopolize the information. They have donor control, think tank and academic disproportionate control. That will continue to contaminate American foreign policy as Trump will sporadically and erratically attempt to actually enforce the voters' will to get us out of these insane wars.
On trying to get America out of the insane wars, this is what Trump ran on though, like ending the forever wars and making peace with Russia, cutting the debt. But along the way, I'm curious to what extent there's a risk of his whole presidency now unraveling because he lost some friends on the way with the debt issue. He lost Musk with the foreign wars. He lost people like Tucker Carlson, but overall, it looked like things were well, too many problems were accumulating from Gaza to Iran. The Syrian thing didn't look the optics of, shaking hands, complimenting the ISIS leader is not a great look, but also, of course, now joining on, going from criticizing Zelensky to embracing him, all of these things. It seems to be uh, building up. And then, of course, the great finale looked like it was going to be the Epstein thing, that he couldn't get out of Epstein out of the media. And it looked like things might unravel, but now the media seems to be letting go of Epstein. And you think the whole presidency might still unravel, or do you think it's stabilizing?
Well, it's like the Trump presidency is one of his reality TV shows. And it's like you got to keep the drama going. So tune in next week. Maybe nuclear war, maybe not. It's unfortunately that kind of drama. I think we'll continue to see that through his entire rest of the next year. If Trump doesn't reverse course on some of these foreign policy engagements, if he doesn't get us out of Ukraine, if he re-escalates, if Gaza reignites, if Iran comes back in, if he gets dragged into a Venezuelan type conflict, or maybe with Colombia or elsewhere, then what will happen, and he is perceived as ignoring domestic issues, out of control healthcare cost, out of control general costs for essential goods. We're having credit problems in the financial system. The entire real estate economy is completely frozen here in the United States. Housing prices are way too unaffordable for people. So you have a bigger gap between buyers and sellers than ever in American history. Interest rates still remain stubbornly high. Inflation of ordinary, everyday essential goods are not coming down to the degree they need to satisfy his voter base. The people have a bigger concern about unemployment over the next 6 months, according to the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, than they have at any time outside of the global financial crisis of 2008. So it looks like we're approaching a recession. And what happens if the AI bubble actually is a bubble? And what happens if it busts? And what happens if it busts in the middle of all this? While you have a Eurodollar system that is financially struggling to keep even the engine going on a data, which we're seeing around the world globally in financial liquidity markets, and you're seeing in repo markets here in the United States. You add and aggregate all that up, he's at major, major risk, and he's got these fractured red lines that if he crosses, he would fracture the entire MAGA base. He'll get badly defeated in the 2026 midterms, even if they're able to redistrict, even if they win at the Supreme Court at restoring the different aspects of the Voting Rights Act in such a way they can add 12 to 15 Republican seats. If he loses the House, then what happens is the last part of his term is pretty much DOA. There's nothing he can get done legislatively. Everybody's getting impeached or investigated for 2 years, and he becomes very hamstrung. So he's really got about a year of leeway to do something and get something done. That's why we were, those on the MAGA base were encouraging the rapprochement with Russia in August while the Senate was, away. Because when the Senate comes back in, the Senate always causes trouble. They want to put those 500% sanctions, sink the economy, distract us forever because they're such war whores and MIC supporters and the rest that's where they keep going. But you're already seeing there's a very big, very good populist challenger, Paul Dans, to Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. There's a bunch of populist challengers to the senator from Louisiana who was holding up Robert Kennedy on the various issues of part of MAGA. So all of those things that he needs to return to and needs to turn and shift his focus to, he only can happen if he solves and resolves these global disputes and doesn't get us further involved and entangled. But if he stays entangled in them, stays distracted, and these issues continue to percolate or even explode on him, then yeah, MAGA will suffer a temporary setback, and his second term will be kind of a lost opportunity. But I would see it then as just transitional. It's transitional to what's coming that's transformative. Populism will have its day and will have its voice heard in Washington sooner or later, one way or another. The only question is, does it need to form in a more radical, dramatic expression, or can we continue to do it through the democratic processes and the institutional parties we currently have? Because if they don't do it, just ask the Tories and the Labour Party in the UK how ignoring populism has worked out for them. Those are two parties that that have existed for a century, dominated UK politics for a century, that may not meaningfully exist in 5 years. The same thing will happen to both parties here in the United States if they continue to ignore the people's will.
My last question is though, just on you mentioned the legal aspect. How is Trump doing now in terms of staying on the right side of the law when it comes to issues such as the tariffs? Again, law is not really my field. Is he, to what extent is he able to do all of this tariffs, on his own and still make it legal?
If he had stayed within the boundaries of what Congress authorized, so constitutionally, Congress is given the power to tariff, but the Supreme Court has said they can delegate the method of the tariff and the amount of the tariff and the who is being tariffed to the president under certain circumstances. Those circumstances require a national economic emergency. Trump identified the national economic emergency as the significant trade deficit and the dearth of industrialization. We're not declining at the scale and speed that Germany's currently doing, but we have been declining now for half a century in industrial production and dominance. And that has devastated the Midwest, the industrial Midwest of America, kind of like the heartlands of the UK, other places like that, the Midlands, very similar here in the US, so much so that we actually call it the Rust Belt. Instead of the Midwest. And so those regions that he was elected to save and to salvage and to restore, the tariff policy, bringing back the old American plan of Alexander Hamilton and others to industrial strength, was essential. Problem is, he got so excited about the tool that he decided to use it every other day. Canada offended me with an ad. 10% tariffs on you. Bolsonaro is in trouble in Brazil because of his fight with Lula. 50% tariffs on you. Just all over the place. That has undermined the credibility, even though that's not legally what's before Supreme Court. Those additional tariffs are not before the court. The original tariffs are what's before the court. It's influencing the debate. And that oral argument will be held November 1st. That's why I told people Trump would cut a deal with China. He can't be in a tariff fight with China when that oral argument happens on November 1st. So those 100% tariffs were pure bluff. There was no way he was going to do that, knowing that the big fight is there. The betting prediction markets are saying they think a 60% chance he loses before the Supreme Court. To give people an idea of what a political disaster that would be, Trump would have to refund all the tariffs. So it would create a huge budgetary problem because he's been using the tariff revenue to pay to cover up, paste over some problems that we have. So my own view is if he had stuck to the original industrial policy agenda, that he had legal leeway within the statutory framework and constitutional predicates to get the Supreme Court to buy in, particularly the libertarian Gorsuch, the traditional constitutionalist in Alito and Thomas, and the more institutionalist in some combination of Barrett, Roberts, and Kavanaugh. Now he's at real risk of losing the power to get the tariffs through because he decided to treat them like sanctions. He got EU disease. He got that politicized virus in his system, and it may have damaged the centerpiece of his economic policy, unfortunately.
Yeah, my initial appeal to Trump, or well, why I was optimistic, very optimistic initially, was uh, well, he seemed to lean a bit towards the whole Hamiltonian economics. That is, I'm a big economic nationalist, so when I hear Alexander Hamilton and Friedrich List, I see this as the main instrument for the United States to revive its economic power. And you have also linked this to ending all the wars, making peace with Russia, so ending the, I guess, imperial overstretch. I think this is a great combination. My pessimism strikes when I see Trump using tariffs to threaten Spain to increase its military budgets. This is when I think he got a bit off the rails. This is not something I read ever in the work of Alexander Hamilton. So, but you know, it's no, it's very strange to watch. But as I said, the main question is whether or not he's in control. Anyways, thank you so much. It's been, yeah, a great honor to have you on the program. So I hope you can come back another time. And well, let me just finish asking you though, where people can find you.
Oh, sure. So for all the geopolitics, law, other politics, you can find at two different sites. One is vivabarneslaw.locals.com. It's the same place you can find the Duran.locals.com. They do great work as well, of course. The other is sportspicks.locals.com for prediction markets, political markets, election markets. We've had a lot of success so far in the elections so far this year. Other geopolitics that now you can trade on like any ordinary schmuck. So you don't have to be a Wall Street insider to get those deals anymore. So that's at sportspicks.locals.com and vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Best places to where we get all of our insight and analysis that we give out to folks.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
Thanks.